Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Ruffly Pinafore dress tutorial. In this installment we are going to be making the skirt, attaching the pockets, and finishing it all off with attaching the skirt and bodice and putting in the zipper. So stay tuned if you want to learn how to do that. But very quickly, I would like to apologize for how bad my narration was in the first one. It was my first time ever making a tutorial and it just didn't go great. And I'm gonna try to do better this time and going forward, because now I know what I did wrong, like looking back on it. So hopefully it will be a little better this time and we'll get better in the future. Another quick thing about my video schedule. This week was kind of a bonus week because I've been trying to do every other week. So we're gonna get another video next week, and then every other week will continue from there, unless I'm feeling like real into it, and maybe you'll get another bonus week or two. But generally, every other week is what you should be expecting, because I am a senior in college and I don't have time. I wish I had time, but for now I don't. So, every other week. Next week's video is going to be a really quick and easy tutorial. It's very fall themed, a little bit more than this one is. So if you want to see that, make sure you like and subscribe so that you will be alerted when I post that one next week. So the first thing we need to do for the skirt is make sure it's nice and ironed and flat. Then we can begin on the hem. For this hem, we're just doing a simple basic one. We're folding it up by 1/2 of an inch and then 1/2 of an inch again, so the raw edge is tucked inside and not visible and won't fray when it is being washed. The reason we're doing the hemming first instead of after the skirt is assembled is so that we can work with it while it is flat instead of having to try to deal with it once it is already gathered and we have a lot less room for movement. And then I'm just doing a straight stitch about 1/2 an inch from the edge to keep down those layers and make sure they're not going anywhere. Okay, with that done, we can begin gathering the ruffle to the main part of the skirt. And to do that, we're just going to use the same gathering method we used for the ruffles, with a running stitch down the entire length of that bottom ruffle. To make this process a little easier, we're marking each 1/8 of the skirt with a pin so that we can match an 1/8 of the bottom one with the 1/8 of the top. And since we're doing a French seam instead of a normal seam, we're going to pin these wrong sides together. So that's why this looks a little weird. I promise it is not a mistake, but it's the easiest way to finish that edge, so that's what we're going with. And then the same method we used to do the ruffle, we're once again just pinning this on, adjusting manually to make sure our gathers are evenly spread out throughout the entire length of the skirt. And then we're just stitching this together with a super skinny seam allowance. That way when we turn it inside out to finish off the French seam, that the raw edge is not getting caught within that second line of stitching. And then we are removing the contrasting red thread to make sure that it will not be visible later. And now we can pin the skirt, flipping it so that the right sides are now together and encasing the raw edge in that little pocket that we're making. And we're going to pin that for the entire length of the skirt to make sure that it does not shift while we are sewing it. And then that gets stitched down with a bigger seam allowance than I usually use to make sure that the second line of stitching, once again, does not catch any of those raw edges and leaves them peeking out between the two layers, and instead they stay in the little pocket. And then once again, the top piece gets ironed as well as that seam, and then we can start finishing the side edges. And these are going to be finished the same way we did the bottom, and we're doing these right now because it's impossible, well, it's not impossible, it's pain to do a zipper seam that is also a French seam. So if these are finished now, then we don't have to deal with them, and we can just stick the zipper in much easier and with a lot less stress. And then we can stitch that down. And I'm being extra careful over that bulk of the original French seam between the bottom of the skirt and the top, just because that is a little more difficult and the needle is a little more prone to being caught there. And now we can gather down the skirt. I'm just using the same method I've used each time. This time I am doing it a little more densely because of the huge difference between the length of the skirt and the length of the bodice. So here's the bodice. We're going to attach the skirt to just the front of the bodice. We're not going to attach it to the lining. We're going to leave that loose so we can use that to cover the raw edges later. And here I am just adjusting the gathers so that they are evenly spread out. Alright, now we can get to pinning. So I'm just starting at the center and working my way outwards. That way I can make sure that the fabric will reach to both edges. And we're just gonna pin down. We're gonna use a lot of pins to make sure all of these gathers are secure. So if you don't have that many, you can always do a basting stitch to keep it in place instead of that, but I like pinning down each individual gather, and it's kind of excessive, but it's what I do, and it makes me feel better about it. And now we can stitch that down. I'm sewing over my pins because I find that it shifts too much if I don't do that. So I'm just being very careful of how I am sewing, and I am adjusting as I go. You also have to be very careful to not get the lining caught under your machine foot while you are sewing, or else you will have to go pick that out, and that would not be fun. Okay, now we're going to pin the lining over the seam so that it is covered. So to do this, we're just going to tuck the bottom of the lining up and align that edge with where the stitch line is from our previous seam. And I'm starting on the back side to make sure that the lining is long enough and completely covers so that it will be caught when we sew. And then I'm going to switch all of those pins to the front of the garment so I can understitch much closer to the seam than I would be able to from the back, since I can't really see it. And there's the pins in place, and here there's one or two that are on this side, and we're just going to make sure that they are swapped and right in the little ditch between the bodice and the skirt. And then we're going to very, very carefully stitch right alongside that seam so that it is as invisible as possible, yet still holds the lining to the front. And this is pretty hard to do neatly, so I just go very, very, very slowly when I'm doing it. And then there is the finished lining, so you can't peel it up very well. And the little places that you can, the raw edge is tucked all the way under. And then we can do a try on. Alright, pocket time. So to start out, we're just giving these a good iron, because that's what you're supposed to do. And then we're going to cut out 2 pieces of interfacing, one for each pocket. And I'm just using the pocket as a pattern. This doesn't really have to be perfect, so I'm not bothering to pin it down. And I'm using fusible interfacing, so that's now going to get ironed to the wrong side of one of those pocket pieces. And we're doing that for both pockets. So 2 pieces of interfacing ironed to 2 different pocket pieces. And then we can flip that over and pin the lining of the pocket onto it. And then that can get stitched on. Please make sure when you're doing this to leave a gap so you can turn it inside out. I'm leaving the gap along the top edge, and you will see why in a minute. But just make sure you don't close it all the way up, or you're going to have to do some seam ripping, which is everyone's least favorite thing. And then, once that is all nice and sewn, and you remove all of these pins, we're going to trim the corners so that it turns nicer and it does not get bulky in those areas. Please make sure not to cut through your stitching or the pocket might unravel. And then through that opening, we're going to pull it through. I'm pulling it through by the lining because it is more flexible than the layer that has the interfacing attached. And get that all nice and turned right side out. Using my scissors to push those corners out just to make sure they look nice and crisp. But you can use a pencil or something, that would also work for this purpose. Now that the pocket is right sides out, we have to pin that opening closed. Because of the way that the stitch line was, it naturally wants to turn itself inwards, so I just pinned at that point, and then we're going to top stitch over that. Since we're going to top stitch the pockets onto the skirt, if we just top stitch the top edge closed at this point, it will look nice and even once we do the other 3 sides to get those attached. To make sure the pockets are where we want to naturally put our hands when we're just hanging out, I am putting the dress on in order to attach them and just using a single pin at the top, making sure not to get my pajama pants that I am wearing underneath, to just secure them, and then we're going to straighten them out later once the skirt is laid flat. Now that we have the skirt laid flat, I'm going to make sure that all of that gathering is not bunching up under the pocket. And then I'm going to make sure that the pockets are aligned straight with the pattern of the gingham, or else it might look a little weird. And then that gets top stitched on just around the edge. Make sure you're leaving your top edge open so the pocket is actually accessible and you can put stuff in it and it is not just decorative. And there's our nice little pocket. Now, all that is left is to do the zipper. And I don't do the zipper in the most fancy or nice looking way. I hate zippers, so I do it in the easiest way. So to start, I'm just marking how long the zipper is and where it ends so that we can stitch up the bottom of the skirt normally without having to worry about that zipper. So I'm just using a normal straight stitch as I would do with any other seam to start off the skirt, and then I'm going to stop and back stitch and finish off my line of stitching at that pin. And once we get to that zipper, we're now going to baste the top closed. So I'm making my stitch length longer than I like it so that it can be picked out easily, and we're not going to backstitch at the beginning or the end of this line of stitching. And I'm starting just where I stopped last time. Now we're going to pin the zipper to this. I'm just finger pressing this open because it's going to be top stitched, so it doesn't really need to be ironed ahead of time. And then I am aligning the teeth of the zipper with those stitches and pinning through both layers of fabric so that the zipper is nice and secured. So in theory, if we go over the zipper with top stitching and attach it to the skirt in this manner, once we pull out those basting stitches, everything will be nice and aligned. Okay, I've switched to a zipper foot, and now I am just I'm starting slightly below the zipper pull. We're going to go back and finish off the very tops of the zippers once the rest of the zipper is sewn on, so that the pull can be moved out of the way and not interfere with our line of stitching. And I am just using my foot as a guide to sew relatively close to those zipper teeth. Once I get to the bottom of that line of stitching, I am turning my project sideways and just going over the end of the zipper several times to make sure that it is completely secure in its spot. And we're switching the side of the zipper foot and doing the same thing on the other side. I'm being super careful to make sure the front of my bodice is not getting caught under the foot and not being sewn together, because once again, seam ripping sucks. Now that that is done, we can go through and rip out those basting stitches. Since they're long, they should come out without much trouble. And now that that's ripped open, we can move the zipper pull out of the way and tuck those top edges of the zipper under and finish off the top of the zipper. And that just gets top stitched down, same as the rest of the zipper, and I'm going slightly over the edge where the zipper is folded under to make sure that it does not pop out. And we're done. So there's the dress in action. If you liked this video, please subscribe. We have some more fun fall content coming next week, and have a good rest of your day.